Okay, so we are going to talk about 1960s. Welcome back from spring break. Um, so we had a whole series of things explaining to us about modernism, the progression, the development, and really when before break you guys were looking at the Farnsworth House, that is kind of the height of modernism. So as we think about the modern aesthetic and kind of what this does for the U.S. and really for the world. It's a prescriptive understanding of progress. So people believe that modern architecture is going to change their life. It goes along with a lifestyle and a quality of life. And all of that set of beliefs and that belief system really starts to break down in the 1960s. In the 60s, the world just turns into a different place, literally. So the images on the screen here, you have April 1st, 1960 on the left, which is the first satellite image of Earth. And then on the right, you have what is known as the blue marble, which was taken from the Apollo 17 crew. I think, did I say that's in 1972? I don't remember. But this shows us a kind of new perspective. And literally you have a cultural shift and a reimagining of kind of what we are and who we are as a globe, not just as a country, right? The world is all connected. You have weather pattern systems. This is the beginning of environmentalism really in the 60s and 70s. So this idea that we have to take care of the planet and it's not going to be here forever if we continue to destroy it. That all happens during this time. Aside from that, many other cultural events take place. So in the 1950s, you really have a culture of people who come back from the war. You have a baby boom post-World War II. And in the 50s, you have lots of kids. There's sort of lots of optimism. The economy in the U.S. is booming, doing really well. And by the time the 60s takes place, and particularly the late 60s, a lot of the baby boomers are either teenagers or older, kind of in their 20s. And you get a kind of general shift in culture. And this is charged by political events. So there's the Cold War during this time, during the 60s, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the development of nuclear weapons, and the beginning of nuclear proliferation. So the fact that nuclear weapons could enter our stratosphere, atmosphere at any point is on people's minds. Everyone's afraid. Kennedy gets elected in 61 and then assassinated in 64. Bobby Kennedy also gets assassinated. Martin Luther King gets assassinated. The Berlin Wall is constructed. It comes down in 89, but constructed in the 60s. 1968, you have a lot of political protests and uprisings here, particularly in Chicago, in Paris, in Mexico. And let's see what else. 30 countries in Africa gain independence from colonial rulers, which is a large moment culturally. The Beatles enter pop culture, and maybe most important to the cultural shift is birth control is introduced. So the first FDA-approved birth control pill is released in the 1960s. And so this begins the era of free love and hippies and the kind of counterculture movement that is so contrasting to the conservative, kind of happy, shiny view of booming America in the 1950s. So the 60s is this decade of unrest. You have the civil rights movement for equality amongst races and also gender, so feminism is emerging. And this is all, I mean, this is literally all still with us today, right? You can see that the civil rights issues are not worked out. They're still important here. Issues of feminism are still important within our political climate. And one other reason that I think this decade is so important for our world today and for you guys as students is because you're still living in this world, whether you realize it or not. Frank Gehry is in his 20s in the 1960s. And so Frank Gehry, who's in his 80s now, and Tom Main, who's a teenager in the 1960s, the kind of starchitects that are prominent today and have dominated maybe how you guys understand architecture, these people were coming of age and studying and really thinking about what architecture would be and their contribution to architecture in the 60s. So in a lot of ways, we're really still in this mindset and still in this way of thinking. Okay, so the 60s, let's see, my next slide, there we go. in the 60s, I don't know who watches Mad Men of our group, but or used to, I should say, watched Mad Men. But in Mad Men, in one of the earlier seasons, the transformation of Penn Station comes up in one of the episodes. And I remember this because I've taught this before. But Penn Station is used as a metaphor for kind of cultural distaste of modernism. So the original Penn Station was built in 1910, and it was built by a firm, built by Charles McKim of the firm McKim, Mead and White. And it was beautiful. I mean, it was in a neoclassical style. You can see the image on the screen here that depicts what it looked like. But this is very similar to the style of today's Grand Central Station, which was never torn down in the middle of the century. And so Penn Station was slated for development. And what development meant in this case was to tear down the original structure and to rebuild a modernist structure in its place. And the structure that gets built is by Charles Luckman and Associates, and this is Penn Station and Madison Square Garden combined. So there are a few reasons this needs to exist. They're trying to incorporate a subway stop, local commuter trains, regional transit, which is the Amtrak logo you see there, and then also Madison Square Garden is a sports arena and a concert venue, a large entertainment center. So for developers and for city planners, this all seems like a great idea. They use this modernist style. They develop something that is going to be contemporary and offer benefits to the population of New York. But people are devastated. People hate this new design. People protest. They write letters to the newspaper. They make cartoons. There's a kind of great sadness about losing this particular building. And Penn Station in New York, most people take public transportation in New York, and many people at that time would have gone through Penn Station twice a day and really spent a lot of time there over their lifetime. So Penn Station had a place in their hearts and really a place in their everyday life. And so creating this new thing that was in the style that people felt was cold, not beautiful in the way that the previous antiquated neoclassical style was, it broke people's hearts. And it was, in 1968, a representation that the taste for modern was over. People weren't interested. They were really devastated. They didn't believe that it was going to change their life or believe in the promise of progress and quality of life that modernism promoted. So further evidence of this is the Congress for International Modernism is a group of kind of European architects and thinkers at the top and created or led by Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe, and some of their colleagues. And among this group, there's a sense that, or there's not just a sense, there's an agenda to promote modernism as the international style. This is the style for everyone. We're going to build like this. This is a kind of architectural congress, as they call it, that they thought they were deciding the rules for the world. And it turned out that worked during the modern era, but it didn't work after that. I have to pause this. I'll pick up with you in a minute.